They laughed when the old farmer walked into the county auction hall, his boots heavy with dried mud, his jacket worn thin, and his hands rough from decades of work on the land. The room was filled with polished executives in suits, silk ties, and shoes that never touched dirt. And when they saw him, they whispered and chuckled as if he had already lost. Someone shouted that this was not a livestock sale, and the laughter grew, but the old man did not flinch. And he did not walk alone. Behind him came a woman in a dark navy pantsuit, hair tied back, eyes locked straight ahead, heels clicking against the marble like a hammer against steel. Her name was Clara Jennings, 36 years old, Harvard MBA graduate, CEO of a fast-growing biofuel startup that was quietly changing the energy landscape of rural America. More importantly, she was the daughter of the farmer whose land these same men were circling like vultures. 5 years earlier, she had come into the same building with slides, spreadsheets, and a vision for renewable fuel drawn from the soil of forgotten counties. She was fresh out of school, eager, determined, full of belief, but they had smirked at her, brushed her off with polite laughter, and sent her away empty-handed. She had not forgotten that humiliation, and she had not forgiven the day the bank foreclosed on her father's land after a brutal winter that left crops frozen and debts unpaid. The men in that room were not there for corn or wheat. They were after the mineral rights beneath the land, the last untapped reserve in the county. They believed they would buy his legacy for pennies on the dollar. But Clara had been building in silence while they poured money into concrete towers and high-priced city offices. She had been forming alliances with agricultural cooperatives and university labs. She had been securing government contracts buried in budgets that no one else noticed. And she had been designing scalable systems that could transform crop waste into fuel. Her company went profitable in its third year, and instead of buying penthouses or sports cars, she began buying land, one parcel at a time, using shell companies and trusted partners. She bought the mills, she bought the freight lines, she bought the storage facilities. She bought the roads that connected the region, and she bought them at auctions just like this one, where the same executives laughed, not realizing who their rival truly was. Now, only one property remained, the original 200-acre family farm. The ground where she had taken her first steps and where her father had buried his sweat into the soil. The auctioneer struck the gavel and called the opening price. An executive raised his hand with a smirk, confident the old man would collapse under the first bid. Clara raised her hand without hesitation, her voice calm, her gaze unshaken. The price doubled. The men raised again, thinking they were bleeding the farmer dry. But every time Clara lifted her hand without blinking, the room grew tense. The crowd of spectators leaned forward. Whispers spread like wildfire, because no one expected this woman to keep climbing. The numbers tripled and the executives began to sweat. One loosened his tie, another checked his phone nervously, and still Clara raised her hand. Finally, the final bid came from Clara. All cash, immediate transfer. she said, and the room went dead silent. The auctioneer slammed the gavel and the farm was sold, not to the bankers, not to the developers, but to the daughter of the man they had tried to crush. The executives turned with pale faces, their arrogance cracked, their confidence broken, and Clara stared back at them with eyes cold as steel. "I did not come here to prove myself," she said. "I came to reclaim what is ours." Her father stood beside her, silent tears gathering in his weathered eyes as the room erupted in murmurs and disbelief. But the story did not end at the auction, because what Clara had done rattled the foundations of the local power structure. 2 weeks later, freight trucks bearing her company's name rolled into town, carrying clean biofuel produced from the very fields they once mocked. The refinery her team had built in secret roared to life, and contracts with state agencies poured in. The town saw jobs returning, money flowing, and the farm standing tall again. But the bankers did not accept defeat quietly. Whispers of sabotage began. Strange fires in empty warehouses, fraudulent deeds appearing in court records, attempts to block permits through bribed officials. Clara knew the fight was not over, and this time she carried every document, every contract, every deed with meticulous care. When an executive tried to forge papers claiming she had used illegal shell companies, the sheriff got involved. Investigators uncovered not just one forgery, but a web of fraud stretching back years, showing how these men had manipulated auctions with phantom bidders and falsified accounts. The police raided offices, seized files and arrested clerks who admitted under pressure that the executives had been running a racket to steal land across the county. The courtroom filled again, but this time it was not Clara or her father who stood on trial. It was the men who had laughed at them. The attorneys for the executives argued that Clara had manipulated the market, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fraud was theirs, and the lies were theirs. The judge listened and then delivered words that echoed like thunder through the chamber. "For years you mocked the people who worked this soil, and for years you stole what was not yours, and now justice will return it." The verdict stripped them of licenses, fined them millions, and sentenced key players to prison for fraud and racketeering. Clara stood tall outside the courthouse with her father at her side as reporters crowded forward, microphones flashing and cameras snapping. She did not boast. She did not rage. She simply said, "The land is ours again. The future is ours again, and no one will take it from us." That evening, they returned to the farm and stood on the porch together, watching the sun spill gold across the fields, now safe forever. Trucks rumbled down the roads, carrying fuel branded with her company's name. Children played in yards that no longer feared foreclosure, and workers filled mills that had been silent for years. The town understood now. Clara had not just bought back a farm, she had bought back dignity and future and independence. She had won not with fury, but with patience, with vision, and with relentless strength. Because sometimes revenge does not roar in anger. Sometimes revenge arrives in silence, in paperwork, in signatures, in deeds stamped by the court of law. And in the end, she had not only reclaimed her father's farm, she had dismantled an empire of greed built on lies. The laughter that once filled the auction hall was gone, replaced by the sound of justice served and a legacy restored forever.